Hey friends, welcome back. Now, last time we had our first tour through the Power BI interface, and now let's actually create our first report. So you see here that I opened a complete new Power BI file. This is why I have this pop-up window here at the beginning, but for me now I simply close it to have my blank Power BI report without any data. So let's get started. In order to connect to data, and here we'd like to connect to an Excel data source, I can either click on import data from Excel here, or I can click it up here, or I go to get data and click on Excel here. Everything works the same way, but for me, I most often use to simply click here on the icon itself. So I will do that. Click here, and then I can choose here Power BI the easy way, XLSX. I can click here, and you can also use this file if you want, because you can download it from the resource section of the course. So I click on open here, and then I wait just a second, and the navigator window here appears. Now in here I can see two icons, which is this gaming TBL and gaming. So TBL is just an abbreviation I've used when I created this table inside this Excel file for table. So that's also the main difference between those two things. So whenever you see a little table icon like that with a blue bar at the bottom, this is referring to tables you have created in your Excel source, or someone else has created in the Excel source you currently use. The other way, or the other icon here, this is referring to the sheet. So that means you can either import the data from the table itself by clicking here and selecting this option. You can also see then the preview in here. Or you click on this icon here and you import the whole sheet. So what's the difference? Well, as a best practice, just from my point of view, if you can, import a table and you only want to get the data from this table, then always choose the table. Because that also means that if in the meantime or later on, someone else or even yourself, you're changing the data on this specific Excel sheet, but you still want to only import the specific table, then there are no additional cleaning steps you need to do. Because you only tick the table, which means that Power BI will also only import the data of the table, and not any additional data which needs to be additional cleaning, right? That's why I said best practice from my point of view is import the table if you can do that. Otherwise, you can also import the whole sheet, especially, of course, if you say that I want to import all the data. And as I said, with the Power Query Editor, you can clean everything. But why do additional work if you can simply only import the data you need by simply selecting the table structure? So I will use the table in here, even though in this case it makes no difference because on the sheet itself there is no additional data. But let's do it best practice. Select the table here. You get the preview in here. You can see what the data looks like. You can also increase the window if you want. It's a small table, but sometimes that's helpful to drag it and make it a little bigger. Also, if someone is changing the data in the meantime, you can always click on this refresh icon here to see just the latest changes of the underlying data, if you want to do that. Then, as soon as you're finished, let's click on load just to get the data into Power BI. So if I click on load, then you'll see that now the data gets loaded, gaming TBL, and you see now it's loaded. And I can see in the fields list here now my table, which I can also expand if I click on this little arrow here. And now I can see all the different kinds of columns in the table. And also if a column is numeric, I can see this little sum symbol in here, right? It tells me the data type of the column in here. Now you see that some of the options which were grayed out in our tour window because we did not have any data, like for instance the measures here, are now available for us, which you can use. Also, let's have a look to the data view here. If I click on data, you now see that if I select the table, which is already selected here, I can see exactly what I meant in the last video. I can see the table in here. So I know exactly what's the structure of the data and I can see all the values in here. And if I go to my model view, if I take this option, then here I can see my specific table. Currently I only have one table, so there's no need to connect it to different tables, but we'll do this later on with a more advanced model. But to get started, that's our table. It's available in here. We can see all the columns in the model view, as well as here in the data view in a table structure. And also here in the report view, if we go here to the fields list, we can see all the data. Now let's actually visualize something. So in order to visualize something, it's quite easy because there are various options to do that. One way would be simply to clicking on one of the fields. So for instance, sales is a numerical field, which means that if I tick it, just click it here, you'll now see that a bar chart gets created. And if I hover over them, I can see exactly what's the total amount of sales. This is the default behavior. So whenever, let me just untick this here, I click on one of numerical fields, like for instance, profit the same way. If I tick this option, again, I would get a bar chart. That's a default behavior in Power BI. If you do not specify upfront what kind of visualization type you want. A different way would be if I, for instance, first select one of the templates here. So let's say I click on a donut chart here, tick this option. You see that now I have my template. I can move it around if I want. I can also make it bigger. But currently it does not contain any data. You see here in the formatting pane, there's an option to add fields to the legend, to details, to values, or to tooltips. And if I would simply click now, after I have selected, make sure you have selected the template here. So if you click it, it's selected. And now if you click on, for instance, sales, you see that now the behavior changes. Because now I get here as a default a donut chart, because I pre-selected here the specific visual type. And if I don't select anything, as you've seen, you get a bar chart. However, of course, all the charts can be modified, which means that if I, for instance, click on a chart like this one, now it's selected. And now you see that by default, it is here selected as here a column chart or a bar chart. But if I click here on, I want to change this to a donut chart, just tick it, you see that now this changes here as well. And of course I can increase the size if I want to do that and drag it around the same way as the other visual. So the point here is really that if you don't select anything up front, by default, numerical fields create bar charts, but you can change it anytime by simply select it first, and after you select it, you change it to a different visualization type. Like for instance here, in this case a donut chart, or if I use a tree map, can click tree map, then I get a tree map in here, and so on. If I only want to see here the value, I can click on card, and then I would see here the value. So it's up to me, right? How I want to do that. Also, you've seen that as when I chose here my template first, what I did was, let me just remove it from here. If I click on the cross symbol here, I can remove sales, and now I got my template back. What I did, if you remember, was simply clicking here on sales. Just select it by clicking it, and Power BI by default put it in the right spot on values here. However, let me just remove it one more time. I can also drag, of course, any field, like sales for instance, and drop it. So drag and drop into sales, and I get the same behavior. And then if I would say, okay, here I have my sales, and now I want to see this for all the regions, I can of course then go to region, and for instance drag region into the legend field, like that. And if I do that, now you see I got here my sales breakdown for each of the regions, as in this case a donut chart, which again I can modify if I want. If I want to choose the tree map, I go to tree map, and I got a tree map here. If I want to have a bar chart, I can simply click on bar chart, and I got my bar chart here. Also, you see that currently the region is on the axis. You can also drag it and drop it to the legend, like that, and you see that the chart now changes slightly, looks different here, but this depends on where you place your fields. If you prefer it on the axis like that, of course you can do that in here. So just to highlight this, again, you can change any kind of visual you have created, and the default behavior is, let me drag it up here, when you use numerical fields, you get bar charts. If you use text fields, for instance, if I would start with region, I first deselect everything. Just make always sure you deselect if you don't want to change a visual. So if we click on the blank canvas here, and now if I click on region, tick this option, you see that by default I get a table. So for text fields, you get tables by default. For numerical fields, you get bar charts. And of course, this table here, you can add fields, again, by either clicking on the field. Let's say I also want to see the sales. I tick the sales and they are added to the values option here. Or the other way would be that I would also see the profit. I drag and drop it and place it in here in the value section. And now you see that the profit is also available here. Also, if you want to change the order here, simply drag profit and drop it on top of sales. You can see a yellow line. And if you drop it there, you now see that the profit are shown first and the sales are behind the profit. So that's how you can simply modify this if you want to do that. Also, for each visual you have created in here, you always have the option, if you go from the here build visual section here, we can see them, to go to the formatting options. So if you have a visual selected and you click on formatting options, you then see all the specific options how to format this visual. And there are quite a lot. And you see that here they're currently all collapsed. But as I said, as you've seen, if you click on the three dots and say you want to expand all categories, you see that there are so many options to customize this, right? And you really can customize more or less everything. The headers, the font size, the font itself, how to display sales, for instance, in millions and so on. The alignment, everything can be customized here. So that's why at the beginning, it's kind of overwhelming, at least from my point of view, because there's so much to customize. So that's why you really have to play around with this. That's the best way to learn it. Because with time, you get better and you know exactly what exactly you want to customize most often, and then you know how to find it. But at the beginning, as I said, it's kind of overwhelming because, as I said, there's a lot really you can customize. So here, for instance, for the values, you can see that here, I can increase the size. I can say, for instance, let's say 14 here. You see that now the values get bigger. I can adjust the color, make them bold. Now everything is bold. It's up to me, right? Also the color and so on. Everything is customizable here. So of course you can collapse this, but as I said, the better way probably would be to go on three dots and say you want to collapse all categories. So you can see everything in here. You can adjust, just to show you a few things, the style, for instance. There are various styles for tables. For instance, here bold header. You see that now the header is bold. And there are also, for instance, flashy rows. If you take this one, it looks like that, and so on. So default options from styles. Of course, the color can be customized then, but most often, at least from my point of view, I'll probably use none or minimal because I personally do not like that in my table. But if you have a use case for that, of course, feel free to do that. And of course, feel free to explore all the options in here, because we can't cover all of them, but it's quite easy. As you've seen, you just need to check them and then you see what the table looks like. So here you can also adjust the grid. So you can adjust the width, for instance. If you do that, you see that the grid here, the lines get bigger. And also you can adjust the color if you want to do that. Same is true for the vertical grid, for instance. If I take this option, you see that now you also have a vertical grid in here for your table. And again, you can customize this the way you want it. Do you want to add a border? Go in here and choose a border. Currently it's this blue here. If I go with the dark, you see that now I also have customized here the lines on top and at the bottom before the total. Speaking of totals, you can see here you can also customize the totals. So what kind of label do you want to show here? Should it be total or a different label? What kind of font size should the totals be? Should they be different, right? You can customize it here. You want to untick them so they are not visible in the table, and so on. So really everything is customizable in the specific table the way you want it. Also for cell elements, you can see here, you can customize here each series individually. Meaning you currently can see here, we got region, profit, and sales. And these are exactly the three columns we have in here. And you can customize everything individually. For instance, if I say I go with the sales here, and then I can customize, do I want to customize the font color, for instance, I can turn this on. And you see that now by default, I get different colors for the font based on the amount here, right? From light blue to dark blue. But of course, if you click on the FX symbol here, you would be able to customize this. So what should be the lowest value? You can say I want to have this, for instance, a more granular blue like this one, and this one should be maybe darker like this one, or maybe even more, so it's easier to spot probably if I make it darker like that. Click OK, and you see that now you have adjusted the color in here. And this can not only be done for font. Let me untick this, so I have it disabled again. You can also do this for the background color. Just make sure, because that sometimes happened to me, that you specify which kind of series you want to color in here, right? So you choose the right one. And for the background color, you can also see that here, this is now for the background, which of course, if you click on the FX symbol here, you can customize here again based on various options. And just to show you maybe one of them, you can also add a middle color if you want to do that. Click OK, you would have it like that. Or if you click on FX, you can say, I don't want to have gradient. You can create it based on rules or field values. We will see field values later on, but for rules, if you click on rules, you see you can specify here rules for the sales. So you can see I got sales between, in this case, around 5,000 to 14,000. So I could say if the value is greater or equal to 0, or let's say here it should be a number, of course, and it is less than here, let's say 6,000 as an example, then it should be, in this case, this light blue. And let's say I create a new rule here and say if it's greater or equal to, and let's say the next step would be 6,000 here, of course not percent, be aware of that. And it should be less than, let's say here, let's say 15,000, just to cover everything we have as a number. And then it should be, let's say here, it should be blue in here. And if we do that and click OK, tick this option here, you see that now we have these two options in here, right? So let's go into FX again, and you can customize or adjust it. So it should be 6,000, sorry for that. Click OK, and now you see it's blue in here. And you can customize, as you've seen here, that anytime. And also remove rules or swapping the rules, which would be the first rule, which should be checked and so on, because you need to be aware. The rules, of course, are checked at first the first rule, then the second rule, and so on. So that means that if one or several rules can apply to the same field, then the first rule, of course, is chosen here, right? That's, of course, logic, but just to be aware of that. So let me click on close, and let me also remove this from here. And the final option, which I like to show you right now, is the data bars. You can turn them on also for the sales, and then you also get those data bars in here. So if you prefer this in your table, you can also add them quite easily. And again, customize them with the FX conditional formatting if you want to do that. So that's it for these these cell elements which are available here, right? For a table, for instance. And also, if you click on a different kind of visual, like the bar chart, you also have, if you select the formatting option here, various options. But of course, they are kind of different to what we've seen in the table, because each visual, of course, has its own options to format. Like, for instance, you can see here, you want to show the X and the Y axis. This, of course, is not available with a table, for instance, right? But here you can simply untick them, then these would be gone, or you turn them on, and then you customize them further. And there again are lots of options in here. And if you want to see all of them, simply click on the three dots in here, and then say expand all categories, and then you see all the options available in here. Some options are also here grayed out currently. The reason is currently we don't have anything on the legend for this one, right? And this is why, of course, in this chart, these options are not available. So you would need to add also a field on the legend in order to customize this further. Another option which I could show you is, for instance, for the country. The country itself is referring to a country. And if I first click somewhere on my blank canvas and then tick the country option, let's click it, you see that by default, now Power BI creates a map for me. So this is the third default behavior when you're referring to geographical data. So text data always by default creates a table, numerical data creates bar chart, and in this case, geographical data, like country, for instance, creates here a map by default, which again can quite easily be changed by simply choosing something else, right? So for instance, if I choose a table here, I get my table structure. Nothing special, but I can easily change it if I want. If I click on the undo option here, I get my map back. I also want to highlight something here with the country. Let me just select it for now. And you see that if I select it, as soon as I do this, then here I get additional tabs which are appearing. And one is the column tools. The reason I would like to highlight this is you have seen that for me, by instance, if I check the option here, I get a map, and the map also shows dots in here, which means that the countries have been recognized. I noticed that for some students, that might depend maybe on your specific Power BI version, so which country you're in, this does not work. And the country column is treated as text field. If that's the case, you can play around with if you select the country column and go to the column tools option, you can play around with the data category. So because sometimes you need to click here and then first choose this is a country. And if you do this, watch what happens. Next to the country here, there a globe icon will appear. So if I do that, let me click on country here. And now you see that there's a globe icon. So for me, the visualization still works. But as I said, some students first need to change the data category so that Power BI is picking the country correctly. And then you'll be able to visualize the map. Just to mention that, okay? So one of those options, either without, by default, like it's working for me, or by changing the data category to country, one of those options should work for you in order to show the map. And the map then has also additional options you can choose here. So legend, latitude, longitude, or for instance the size. Size could be interesting because you could drag, for instance, a numerical field like sales and drag and drop it onto size. If I do that, and now you see different kinds of bubble sizes, and the greater the bubble in here, so let me just maybe place it here. It doesn't matter if it's overlapping something, but the greater the bubble size, the more the greater the amount of sales. So this can be visualized and highlighted in a map visual, for instance. Also, click on the format your visual option, just to go to the format options, and again you see various options in here. Legend is grayed out because there are no fields on the legend, but for map settings, for instance, you can choose different kinds of styles. So dark, for instance, would be this dark, and there are other ones by default available. Road, I think, was a default one, but you can play around with this if you want to do that. So let me just make it smaller. Under controls, do you want to enable auto zoom or not? Zoom buttons, do you want to show them or not? So if I turn them on here, for instance, then those buttons would be visible in here. And there are various other options to customize this further. For the bubbles, you can increase the size. So if the bubble size is still too small for you, you can simply increase the size here. And then you see that the bubbles, they are still proportionate to each other, but they are increased in size here. And do you want to show the category labels? Turn them on. And then you would also see the countries like India here, US, Canada, and so on. Or do you want to show a heat map? Go to heat map here, and then you can see a heat map in here, which again can be customized further in here, various options. It's up to you whether you want to use that. In this case, I think the bubble makes more sense, but as I said, play around with these customization options which are available in here, and they're quite a lot, right? And that's it for our first introduction, and in the next video, we will then continue working on our report. So that's it. If you got questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, best guys.